I know what you're thinking.
No mother could ever truly turn on her own son. But let me tell you, when your child, your flesh and blood, raises his hand and strikes you, his aging mother, hard enough to leave a bruise over something as utterly ridiculous as a lack of salt in a bowl of soup, everything you thought you knew about family and love shatters.
He beat me. He actually beat me.
My own Mark, the boy I carried for 9 months and spent my entire life protecting, physically assaulted me in my own kitchen because the dinner I lovingly made wasn't perfectly seasoned. The moment I fell to the floor, my glasses flying off, the sheer pain wasn't just physical. It was the pain of a lifetime of sacrifice being repaid with violence. It was in that moment, lying helpless, that I knew the old rules were gone, and what I did next, the calculated, cold, final move I made, was the only thing that could save me. Tell me, honestly, if you were me, what line would your child have to cross before you realize the monster you created has to be stopped? Was I wrong for choosing my own survival over his freedom? To understand that night, you have to understand the decades that led up to it. My son, Mark, has always been a creature of strong, volatile appetites. As a baby, his cries weren't just cries, they were earth-shattering demands. As a toddler, tantrums were epic, destructive affairs that we, his parents, always ended up capitulating to just for a moment of peace. My husband, David, God rest his soul, was a gentle man, perhaps too gentle. He tried, he really did, to instill discipline, but Mark had a way of wearing him down, using guilt and sheer volume to get his way. I, being the typical loving but foolish mother, always stepped in, smoothing things over, making excuses. He's just high-spirited, I'd tell David. He's a future leader. The truth, I now see with agonizing clarity, is that we never taught Mark the word no. When David passed away 10 years ago from a sudden heart attack, my world collapsed. I clung to Mark as my last connection to David, my last purpose. This, of course, was the perfect storm for Mark's entitlement to balloon out of control.
He never finished college.
He'd enroll, demand I pay the exorbitant tuition and supply costs, attend for a few weeks, and then drop out, claiming the professors were idiots or the subject was beneath his intellectual capacity. He'd spend months playing video games in his room, demanding silence while he focused, only to emerge late at night for a meal I was expected to have ready. He's 32 years old and has never held a job longer than 6 months. He'd burn through what little inheritance David left me with his endless investment opportunities, or his need for the latest, flashiest gadgets to look professional. I was a classic enabler, yes, I admit it. I convinced myself that my duty was to be his soft place to land, his perpetual safety net. In reality, I was his doormat, his punching bag, and his personal ATM. Every conversation was a tightrope walk. One wrong word, one suggestion that he should maybe, get a job, would result in hours of cold silence, or worse, a terrifying, vein-popping tirade about how I didn't believe in him and was actively trying to sabotage his success. The emotional abuse was a daily torture, a constant low-level humming of anxiety that never left me. I stopped having friends over.
I stopped going out.
I was permanently tethered to the house, waiting for his next demand, his next mood swing. My life was dedicated to managing Mark's happiness, which was a black hole that nothing could ever fill. The pressure cooker really intensified about 6 months ago when I had to tell him I couldn't bail him out of a significant credit card debt he'd run up buying car parts for a vehicle he didn't even own yet. He locked me out of the living room for a week, forcing me to stay in my bedroom, and would only communicate by leaving notes on the kitchen counter demanding food. The house became a tomb. That was the moment I started to feel the fear supersede the love. The fear wasn't just emotional. I could feel it manifesting physically, my heart constantly racing, my sleep utterly ruined. I started keeping the bedroom door locked at night, something I'd never done, a small, desperate act of self-preservation. This brings me to that Tuesday evening. I had been particularly excited to make him dinner.
Why?
Because he had actually managed to have a civil conversation with me that morning, asking, almost politely, for my classic French onion soup. It was a complicated, time-consuming recipe, one that required hours of slow caramelizing onions and making a rich beef stock from scratch. I thought, naively, this is it.
A peace offering.
A step toward normalcy. I spent all afternoon in the kitchen. My back ached, my eyes teared up from the onions, but I didn't care. I grated the Gruyere, toasted the baguette slices, and ladled the steaming, fragrant soup into the oven-safe crocks. I even lit a candle on the table. Mark came home late. He'd clearly had a bad day, probably another business meeting that went nowhere.
He didn't even look at the candle.
He sat down, grabbed a spoon, and took a huge, loud slurp. I watched, my heart in my throat, hoping for that rare, satisfying nod of approval.
Instead, he slammed the spoon down.
The delicate china cup rattled. "What the hell is this, mother?" he snarled, his eyes narrowed into slits. The sudden shift in his demeanor was like a physical shockwave. "It's your French onion soup, dear," I said, my voice barely a whisper. It's disgusting," he roared, pushing the bowl away. It slid across the table, splattering the rich, dark broth onto the crisp white tablecloth I'd just laundered.
"It's bland. It has no depth. There's no salt.
It tastes like hot sadness."
I felt dizzy.
I'd added salt to the stock, I was sure of it, but maybe I hadn't added enough.
Maybe my aging palate was off. I am so sorry, Mark.
"I'll get the shaker, you can just add some." That's when he snapped. He shot up from the chair, towering over me, his shadow swallowing me whole. "You think you can just fix this with a shaker?" he spat, his voice trembling with manufactured fury. "This is hours of my time you've wasted. I come home exhausted, starving, and you serve me this insult?
You are pathetic.
You can't even get a simple meal right." And then, he did it. The first blow was an open-handed slap across my face. It was the sound that terrified me most, a sharp, wet thwack that echoed in the silence of the room. My head snapped back, a searing pain exploded across my cheek, and I stumbled backward.
He didn't stop.
He grabbed my shoulder, his grip like iron claws, and shoved me hard against the wall, rattling the framed watercolor print there. Before I could catch my breath, he started raining down a flurry of weak but frantic blows, a punch to the arm, a shove that sent me staggering, a kick to the shin. He was a whirlwind of impotent rage, finally unleashing years of banked-up resentment and entitlement onto the one person who had always loved him unconditionally. I fell to the linoleum floor, curling into a protective ball, whimpering, my mind screaming, "This is the end. This is how I die." He stood over me, panting, his face red and slick with sweat, his eyes bulging with a terrifying mixture of fury and, underneath it, a terrifying enjoyment of his power. He kicked the empty soup bowl, sending it shattering against the baseboard. "Clean it up," he screamed, his voice breaking. "Clean up your miserable failure." I lay there, listening to him rant, cataloguing the growing pain in my limbs, and that's when it happened. The love shield I had carried for him for 32 years finally disintegrated. It turned into a bitter, icy resolve. I looked at the man standing over me, and I didn't see my son, I saw my captor, my abuser, a stranger who had stolen my peace and now my dignity. I was 73 years old, and I was being beaten by the child I raised, all because of salt.
The irony was sickening.
I knew, with absolute, terrifying clarity, that if I let this go, he would do it again, and next time, I might not get up. My survival instincts, dormant for decades, finally roared to life. I realized I was not just fighting for my life, I was fighting for my soul, the last shred of my self-worth.
So that's the situation I was in.
Bruised, bleeding, and terrified, lying on the cold kitchen floor while my grown son stood over me demanding I clean up the mess he made.
I was at the absolute end of the line.
Before I tell you what happened next, what choice I made in that moment, I want you to pause and comment below.
What would you have done? Would you have pleaded for mercy? Would you have just cleaned up the mess and let it go?
Or would you have finally fought back, knowing that fighting back meant destroying your family forever? Tell me what you would have done in my shoes, because I had to make a decision that would change both of our lives forever. I slowly, very slowly, uncurled myself. Mark was still pacing, running his hand through his hair, muttering threats under his breath about moving out and never speaking to me again.
He didn't even look down at me.
He had already dismissed me as a threat, as nothing more than a broken object he could safely ignore. That was his fatal mistake. My eyes scanned the area, not for something to run with, but for something to use. On the counter, right next to the stove, was the heavy, solid wood rolling pin I used for pie crusts. It was old, dense, and felt reassuringly heavy. I pushed myself up, my movements jerky and slow, masking the surge of adrenaline that was now pumping through my veins. The pain in my cheek and ribs was a distant, secondary thing. My focus was absolute. I grabbed the rolling pin. It was a silent movement, one born of years of tiptoeing around him. I didn't rush. I didn't breathe. I just held it, letting the weight anchor me.
Mark, still facing the oven, finally stopped his rant. He sighed dramatically, ready to resume his command. "I'm not waiting all night, Mother. Get up, Anne." That's all he got out. I didn't aim for his head. I aimed for his legs, his balance. I raised the rolling pin and brought it down hard, right across the back of his knees. The sound was a dull, sickening thud, followed by a raw, guttural cry of animalistic pain. Mark's legs instantly buckled, and he collapsed to the floor with a crash, clutching his knees, his face a mask of shock and agony. He wasn't yelling anymore, he was just making terrible, strangled noises. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, finally seeing me. The woman standing over him with the rolling pin was no longer his soft, pleading mother. I was the terrifying instrument of his comeuppance. He tried to scramble away, but his legs wouldn't support him. "Mom, what did you do? What the hell did you do?" he screamed, the terror in his voice palpable. I looked down at him, my own breathing ragged, and I felt nothing but a profound, cold calm. "I saved my life, Mark," I whispered, and the sound of my own voice, firm and steady, felt foreign to me. I dropped the rolling pin with a clang, walked past his thrashing body, and went straight to the wall phone. My fingers, steady despite the tremors in my body, dialed 911. I spoke clearly, slowly, forcing every syllable out. "Yes, I need the police and an ambulance at my address immediately. My son has assaulted me, and I had to defend myself. He is injured." As I gave the address, I kept my eyes on Mark. He was weeping now, not in rage, but in pure, selfish fear of the consequences. "Mom, please, don't do this. I'm sorry. I'll never do it again. They'll send me to jail. Please, I love you." The words were like dust. They held no weight. Years of lies and manipulations had rendered his apology meaningless. The sound of the sirens, closer and closer, was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. The police arrived, quickly followed by paramedics. I was treated first, my cheek was swollen and bruised, and I had significant contusions on my arm and ribs. The officers listened to my account, which was corroborated by the chaotic scene in the kitchen, the broken crockery, and Mark's injured state. Mark, hysterical and still trying to spin a narrative about a slip and fall and overseasoned food, was quickly silenced. The evidence of my injuries, photographed meticulously by the officers, spoke louder than any of his lies. He was taken away on a stretcher, not just for his knee injury, but in police custody. It was surreal. Watching the flashing lights, seeing him being loaded into the ambulance, his face pale and tear-stained, I felt a single, heavy wave of grief, not for the monster he had become, but for the life we should have had. But that wave quickly receded, replaced by a profound, life-altering sense of peace. The next few weeks were a blur of doctor appointments, police statements, and a terrifying meeting with a district attorney. I was advised to press charges, not just for the assault, but to obtain a permanent restraining order. Mark's defense tried every tactic, claiming I was mentally unstable, that I fabricated the story, that he was the victim of a deranged old woman. But the physical evidence was overwhelming. In the end, Mark pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of battery to avoid jail time, receiving a substantial amount of community service, mandatory, intensive anger management therapy, and a strict, enforceable 10-year restraining order preventing him from coming within 500 feet of my home or my workplace. It wasn't the closure of a life sentence, but it was the closure of my nightmare. The aftermath saw me move through an incredible transformation. I got into therapy, not to heal from a bad relationship, but to heal from decades of trauma and a lifetime of enablement. I changed the locks on the house, had the kitchen floor repaired, and for the first time in 10 years, I invited my friends over for a nice, quiet, perfectly seasoned dinner. I started painting again, a hobby I had abandoned when Mark deemed the smell of the oil paint too strong. I even adopted a small terrier mix from the local shelter. My life is quiet now. It is peaceful. It is mine. I occasionally receive letters from Mark, often riddled with thinly veiled manipulative language, but my lawyer handles them. I will not break the restraining order. I will not enable him again. I understand now that the greatest act of love is sometimes the greatest act of letting go, even if it feels like tearing out your own heart. I did what I had to do to survive, and I have no regrets about saving the only life I could truly control, my own. So, that's where the story ends. Not with a tearful reunion or a miraculous turnaround, but with a new beginning, a quiet, well-deserved second chance.
I had to hurt my son to save myself, and in the strange, twisted logic of our broken family, I feel like I finally did my duty as a mother by setting a final, unbreakable boundary. If you believe I was right to defend myself and finally say enough is enough, please smash that like button. Subscribe to my channel for more deeply personal and necessary stories like this one, because we need to talk about the hidden abuse in families. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess, the line mark crust, and the choice I made, down in the comment section.
I'll see you all in the next story.